A lot of acupuncture practitioners can't use Moxa because of the smoke, because their clinics won't allow them to. So, there are good reasons why Moxa is the poor cousin. But nevertheless, I think a lot of practitioners are wary of using it because of this unfamiliarity, this cultural unfamiliarity.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Strength and gratitude are often found inside of trouble and adversity. I generally don't go looking for trouble. I'm fond of heroes' journey stories, but in my own life tend to conflate appeasement with seeking to understand and, too often, deny the dragons that are mine to slay. I hope for negotiated settlements and try to still the voice that's itching for a fight. Fortunately, there is rarely a way around adversity, and that's a good thing, because without a stone to whet your edge on, you don't have an edge. Without some trouble that's worth committed attention, the potentials of unmanifested capacity don't get an opportunity to develop. Adversity is what makes the voyage of exploration to a solution worthwhile. A problem that will not leave you alone, that has you ruminating and agitated about how to improve something, that's a problem worth having. No one willingly sets out to make things better without the motivation, point of frustration, agitation, and an uninformed determination that provides the rocket fuel that overcomes the gravity of complacency and the fear of failure. A problem big enough to engage your heart and imagination? That's a worthy adversary. A trouble with enough dimension that it will matter if you fail? That's a trouble that will make for the kind of challenging work that makes a day worth living. Problems not easily solved, the ones that reflect back untapped potential and firm your resolve, the ones that are interesting because they're difficult, that kind of adversary will drive a taproot into your kidney jur. But it has consequences, because then you don't know what you might be capable of. Taking on something big, troublesome, and without a solution, it's the kind of fool's errand that has the potential to turn you into a magician. Merlin Young loves Moxa enough that it's taken him into Africa to treat drug-resistant tuberculosis. It's driven him to investigate and write a book, and then recently re-edit and expand it. In this conversation with Merlin and another Moxa maven, Oran Kivity, we discuss the inspiration behind Moon Over Matsushima. Merlin's deep dive into biochemical actions of Moxa and his unbridled enthusiasm for burning mugwort, along with Oran's innovations using Moxa, rhythm, and a perchance for digging up Japanese Moxa enthusiasts who have explored the edges of Artemisia's unique capacity for healing. We'll light this conversation up after a few words from the folks who make it possible for you to enjoy Qiological. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear-Don't-Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic. because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Oran Kivity, Merlin Young. Hey guys, welcome back to Geological. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
So, the boys with the Moxa. This is the middle of winter here in St. Louis right now, and this will air while it's still wintertime as well. I mean, you could use Moxa in any season, but especially right about now, a nice Moxa treatment sounds pretty good. And it's always fun to talk about different aspects of Chinese medicine. Look, I love acupuncture. I'm crazy about it. But there's a lot more to acupuncture. You know, Moxa is one of those interesting things, you know, in the character that you write acupuncture. It's 2 characters. It's needle and Moxa. But often enough, Moxa is like this, I don't know, how do I say it? Second-class citizen in the Chinese medicine world. And so I'm happy to have you guys here and take a little dive here into the hot stuff. I'm curious, like to begin here, you know, from each of you, just a quick, like, what lit you up about Moxa? What fired you up? No pun, well, maybe pun intended. What fired you up about Moxa?
So shall I jump in first, Michael? Is that okay? Okay. Well, I want to keep it as short as I can. So basically, I learned about Moxa in my basic training. That was in the UK here at the Worsley School here. And he rated Moxa highly as a therapeutic tool. Unfortunately, the content of the teaching was very limited because nobody knew what they were talking about, to be quite frank. And so subsequent to that, studying particularly with Steve Birch over several years, I realized that there was a whole load of potential that is really poorly understood in the mainstream of traditional East Asian medicine, or whatever you want to call it. And so slowly started picking it apart for myself in ways which made sense to me. So I think that's my best introduction to start with from my background with it. I don't know, Oran, how that resonates for you or doesn't.
I think Moxa grew on me. It was, as you say, not very extensively taught when I studied acupuncture. And it seemed like cupping, like a kind of second-class citizen. The most important thing was that you're going to do needling. But as I got into, even in China, I found that there was very interesting stuff with Moxa being done on the belly, on Ren 8. And there was a doctor who had a whole department, and they spent a lot of time doing Moxa on Ren 8. But they were also regarded as second-class citizens. There was a hierarchy in the hospital, and the TCM Zhongyao practitioners were the kings. They were in charge. And then beneath them, there was the acupuncturists. And then Moxa was a kind of poor cousin of that. And beneath them, there was Trina. And then beneath them, there was the Qigong practitioners. And it was a definite hierarchy, but the herbal doctors were at the top. But I got into Moxa through this guy doing a lot of stuff in the Moxa department. And then I got really excited by Japanese acupuncture and the potential of rice grain Moxa, like small or half rice grain Moxa, small cone moxibustion, Okyu, where you could use it almost like doctors use needles. You could just do a prescription of points with Moxa, and it could treat symptoms in a way that needles couldn't. You know, you could do Moxa all around the knee when people have arthritic pain, and the pain would get better. So I just got into it, and the more I saw it and the more I used it, the more I got excited about it. And then, because I wasn't very good at Moxa, I started to find easier things to do, which we'll probably talk about later.
Actually, I want to talk a little bit about that right now, because my experience with Moxa, we had it in acupuncture school. It was, I don't think it was so much a second-class citizen as it was, maybe in my mind, it was a second-class citizen. I don't think the schooling made it a second-class citizen, at least where I went to school. I went to school to learn acupuncture, damn it. And so things like Moxa, it's a bit of a distraction. Gua sha, I was like, yeah, whatever, folk medicine. Like, I'm not here for that. Boy, was that a mistake, right? Not to use gua sha more, earlier in my career. Moxa, I had trouble with because I have weak lungs. And so the super smoky cigar Moxa, it was just intolerable to me. And it just seemed weird. Like acupuncture is already weird. And I'm going to light up a cigar or something that smells like dope, and wave it around on someone. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. So I kind of took myself out of the running there. Now, we also had some Japanese teachers that did exactly what you were talking about, Oran. They had these precise rice grain treatments, which I actually loved. But for some reason, it's like I didn't have the personality to practice it and get good at it. But I think it's extraordinary, in particular, that Japanese rice grain.
It's interesting, Michael, what you said there about your first sort of experiences with Moxa. Mine was with a Moxa stick in the clinic at the acupuncture school. And I set off a patient with an asthma attack. So it was hardly a promising start.
Hardly a promising start. What kept you going, Merlin?
But it was raw Moxa in the Moxa pole. So basically that went literally out the window. And it was this aspect of using more refined Moxa. And obviously when you're using very, very small cones, the quantity of smoke you're creating is limited. The quality of the smoke in terms of its irritation is limited. And also, if you're careful with the incense stickers or the tapers or whatever you want to call them for lighting, you can also modify that as well. So the actual exposure for irritants for the patient is, and for the practitioner, very importantly, if you're doing this a lot, I would not want to work in a TCM hospital, which uses a multi-bed ward with everybody using Moxa sticks. If you were doing that daily, undoubtedly you would suffer in the long term, I'm sure, with irritated lungs. So, but these refined approaches to Moxa makes it more fiddly, and just like I think Oran suggested, because he wasn't very good at the small cone Moxa, well, ditto here, big time. And you've never, and I mean, we've trained a lot of health workers with the Mox Africa project using Moxa, and one thing we've found is that any health worker who's never seen Moxa or heard of it before, and anyone we've trained who particularly struggles with the fiddliness of small cones, almost invariably ends up as being the most accomplished within a couple of days. So it is interesting this how what is initially a challenge actually is quite, it's quite manageable. Yeah.
Merlin, that I think that holds true for so many things in life. I'll pick almost any topic that, I'm not good at that, or I'm uncomfortable with it, or not so great at it. But you bring some attention, you bring some practice, maybe you get some help, to find out where you're not doing it quite right. And it is possible to make improvement, that's for sure. So since I have you here, who's trained a lot of people with Moxa Africa, what advice would you give someone like me who just feels clumsy with Moxa and I'd like to get better?
It's pretty simple. Stick at it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. My stubby fingers, which interestingly, I'm going to add a little bit to this, which were, when I first started doing it, autoimmune arthritic. And I've got 10 fingers still, and of them, only 2 of them are arthritic anymore. So maybe just doing Moxa is good for the general circulation and the joint movement in your hands.
I'd like to come back to a couple of things.
So is it really as simple as practice, or and you've got a lot of experience with this as well?
Yeah, I'd like to come to a couple of things. And first of all, with regards to being clumsy at it, I'm always put to shame by my patients who I teach to do home Moxa, particularly for pregnancy. And the husband is going to do the Moxa on the wife during the different months of pregnancy. And like within a few weeks, those husbands end up better at it than me. And I just think, how do they manage that? There's just some people have got it and some people like myself don't really have it. So I'm in my 20th year of doing rice grain Moxa, and I look at my cones sometimes and I think, man. But, sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're not. And I think I suffer from sticky hands. So particularly when I'm teaching, I get excited and my hands start sweating, and then, my cones get really mushy and stick to my fingers. But when I'm in my practice and relaxed, they're not that bad. Sometimes it's just as long as I don't get excited. So that's one thing. It takes practice, and some people are naturally better at it than others. And sometimes your cones work and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they kind of look awful and sometimes they look graceful. And, so you just have to accept that there's ups and downs with your cones. And just like anything, just like playing the piano, just like playing an instrument, just like doing martial arts, you have good days and bad days. So my good days are okay, and my bad days are kind of bad. So there you go. I accept. I'm old enough to accept myself in this kind of particular field. But I'd like to go something that you said, Michael, which is that Moxa seems like a kind of, needles you can understand, but Moxa feels weird. And actually, I don't think it does feel weird, because I don't like the smell from a Moxa stick, but I love the warmth. And there's something about, when we have a tummy ache, or when women have period pains, they put a hot water bottle on their tummies. So warmth is good, and warmth is very intuitive. We know that warmth helps us, and, it's good for a painful back, or it's good for, your tummy when it's bloated. So warmth is good. So Moxa shouldn't be counterintuitive. Moxa should, we should immediately be attracted to it. And what I love about Ontake is that Ontake is a form of Moxa that I work with a lot. For your listeners who don't know me, it's a piece of bamboo filled with Moxa wool, and you light one end of it and you tap it rhythmically on the skin. So it's almost touching the skin, but not quite. And that feels extremely comforting to patients. It immediately puts them in a state of relaxation. So I think that the idea that Moxa is counterintuitive is surprising. It's just the fiddliness of it that's counterintuitive, or the smelliness of the Moxa stick, which is kind of not so attractive. But when you get to those more refined Moxas, like Japanese semi-refined Moxa, like Wakakusa, then the smell is not so coarse. It smells quite pleasant, and the feeling is wonderful. So, yeah, I think that's my reaction to the conversation.
Absolutely agreed that the experience of it is wonderful. I think what I'm talking about here is the rational Western mind. You're going to go see this person, some weirdo with needles, right? That's already a little strange. Now they're burning this stuff. It seems strange. Look, I live in the Midwest of the United States. Actually, acupuncture's made some pretty good inroads here, but it's still a little weird, a little strange. The thing that you guys were talking about, in particular, heat for back pain, heat for menstrual discomfort. Look, everybody knows that, right? I mean, no woman puts ice on her belly for period pain. People put ice on their back all the time. Well, I ice my back and it's not getting better. It's like, well, duh, have you tried heat? Well, no, all right? But once they do, it's like magic, unless it's a heat condition. So, yeah, like appealing to that animal sense of warm equals comfort. Yeah, that I think that'll help me a little in my clinical work, or it does help me because that's exactly how I talk to people about it, using warmth.
But going back to this sort of second-class citizenship, in a way, the acupuncture profession is its own worst enemy in that respect, because a lot of people no, that's unfair. I mean, a lot of acupuncture practitioners can't use Moxa because of the smoke, because their clinics won't allow them to. So, there are good reasons why Moxa is the poor cousin. But nevertheless, I think a lot of practitioners are wary of using it because of this unfamiliarity, this cultural unfamiliarity, because, Oran, you've worked in East Asia, so you've got awareness of familiarity with Moxa in a different culture. So, but I would guess very few people, if you were to do a street survey, have you heard of acupuncture? Have you heard of Moxa? The difference would be dramatic. Actually, I've got a little story here. We were in Kampala in Uganda with NHK, with the Japanese film crew from NHK, the Japanese national TV broadcaster. And they actually went on the street, a really busy street in downtown Kampala, and just randomly selected people and then asked them if they'd ever heard of Moxa. And one person had, which absolutely astonished me. I'm watching this thinking this is a total waste of time. And this person said, yeah. But I mean, that exemplifies the situation. Whereas if you were asked people if they'd heard of sticking needles in people, probably 60, 70, maybe even 80% would be saying that, even in a town like, or a city like Kampala in East Africa.
I'm reminded of something that you said to me a few years ago when we were talking about Mox Africa and you were trying to get some research done. So this is way back in the beginning. And you said, well, acupuncture research, there's quite a lot of research into it, but trying to persuade people to do funded research into kind of burning these little volcanoes on people's skin and blistering their skin. First of all, it's not sexy. And secondly, it's regarded as some kind of voodoo. So that stuck with me at the time. I thought, yeah, I can imagine. It never crossed my mind that a doctor would accept needling but not Moxa. But of course, that's exactly what a doctor would do. A doctor would accept needling because they did it anyway.
Absolutely.
So
and there's very...
Sure. Well, they're familiar with needles. It's part of their toolkit in a way. Not acupuncture needles. Well, maybe, but yeah, Moxa is just like weird.
And there's very limited research in the West on Moxa, and almost no clinical research. So if there is research, it might be on animals. Whereas there's a lot of research on Moxa from China. There's a lot of research on Moxa from Korea, and there's a lot of research from Moxa in Japan. So then again, I think that reflects just cultural familiarity. It makes sense, of course. And also, actually, Moxa is remarkably, I think, is probably easier to research than acupuncture from a scientific perspective.
How's that?
Well, it's easier you don't have this aspect of practitioner. It's more mechanical. And actually, if you're looking for blood changes, particularly, actually, you're more likely to see them because I think Moxa can provoke changes in the blood, which actually acupuncture isn't quite so good at. And there are plainly some things which Moxa exceeds capacities of acupuncture, and always has done probably. So it's got so much potential. It's got so much potential for, I think, for providing evidence on Moxa's own terms, which would include that aspect of placebo, and is a point sham point or not a sham point? Is the needling is it properly controlled? And you can't control, you can't double blind a Moxa protocol. I don't think you can anyway, but you can genuinely easily test effects using Moxa, and we've got experience of that.
I think it's worth mentioning as well that in Japan, Moxa was licensed separately. So there were practitioners like Fukaya, who's a very famous 20th century moxibustion practitioner, who did nothing but Moxa. He didn't needle anyone. So his entire practice was specialized into Moxa, and he was very influential. And his work has kind of been passed down to us through his writing and through his son. And also there's a guy in Spain called Philip Caude, who I think you've interviewed on this show.
He's been on the podcast.
Who's also practices just with Moxa. So there's now a kind of revival movement. There's a movement in Europe and in the US of people who are doing Moxa alone. They don't use needles at all. And I think that's really exciting. So there's this kind of whole new trend, if you like, of people. Philip was a physiotherapist, then he studied acupuncture, and then he renounced needles and just got into Moxa and Moxa alone, just like Fukaya. And that's having a big spread. A lot of shiatsu practitioners who've moved into doing Moxa. So I think that's very exciting for the profession.
And this is interesting. We've had so many instances where needles are being used by other professions, PTs, physical therapists in particular, with dry needling. I mean, it's a complete rebranding of acupuncture. So there's that. There's a thing called the Graston technique. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's also a physio technique. It's gua sha, except they have these very specialized looking tools. It looks like they were designed by Klingons, actually. And they're very expensive. And they do what we can do with a soup spoon. But it's a whole technique. And again, it's been rebranded and used by other healthcare practitioners. It makes me wonder, Moxa, it's not regulated. I mean, it's funny. I mean, maybe it's not funny, but as we're having this conversation, it makes me wonder if other allied health practitioners might pick this up and go, hey, this is helpful, and run with it. Maybe you see massage therapists picking it up. Maybe you see physiotherapists picking it up. I wonder, in some ways, if other professions might take it forward more than us acupuncturists. I know it's a bit heretical to say that, maybe even, something I shouldn't say in public, but There you have it. Merlin, you're already training people that are not acupuncturists in Africa with great effect and helping lots of people. Love to get your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there's this, I guess maybe I sit on I sit on two sides of a fence, but there's the side of the fence that I sit on in regards to Moxa and its availability to other type of health professionals or not, even just for lay practice or for family practice, is very, very coloured by the ideas that I have about health provision generally, and how Moxa feeds into that. And I'm quite convinced that Moxa can be a very effective health intervention, which can be helpful when health provision is deficient. And I think we'd all agree that at the moment, that situation, that deficiency is spreading because of the costs of decent healthcare, the sort of healthcare that we would expect as members of the West, the developed world. The cost of medicine is skyrocketing, which means that actually good healthcare is becoming more and more the exclusive of, frankly, an economic elite. So I personally have got this very sharp axe that I've been grinding for quite a long time, which is that Moxa is a potential tool to actually address some of these inequalities, even for really serious conditions. And I think that the history books, actually, if we examine them appropriately, would confirm that that's always been the case with Moxa. It has the capacity to reach those parts that the other therapies are no longer able to reach because of the biomedical culture that we now live with.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account.
I think that's true, Merlin, because, for example, Hirata, who was a Japanese practitioner in the early 20th century, he devised a whole therapy using a kind of moxibustion tool. It was like a heated probe, but it was a heated probe, and he had these two principles. The first was that his system had to trigger the body's own healing response. So that was his first condition. And his second condition was that people could use it at home on their own. So when he wrote his first book, I think in the 1930s, and it sold out. And then it was reprinted, and then it sold out, and not reprinted. So Hirata devised a system that basically had to fulfill two conditions. And the first condition was that it had to trigger the body's own healing response. So it wasn't like a symptom reduction treatment. It was about triggering the body's own healing response. And the second condition was that it would be people's medicine, so he could teach people to use it at home. And I think so that fits in very nicely with what Merlin was saying, which is that it was like a family or a folk medicine.
So Moxa to the people.
Yeah, a people's medicine.
In essence. Yeah.
It was interesting. You mentioned Fukaya earlier as well, Oran, and there was another 20th century Moxa master, Sawada, who did practice acupuncture alongside his Moxa. But actually, my understanding is he was never licensed to practice acupuncture in Japan. But he's one of the most famous acupuncture practitioners probably of the 20th century in Waki Moxa, probably more accurately. But so yeah, this sort of separation is it's pernicious, I think.
And I think it gets tricky, especially as acupuncture becomes sort of air quotes here, integrated into the larger conventional healthcare system. Look, in my clinic, my own little private clinic, I can do whatever I want. I can burn Moxa, I can not. But if I was working in a hospital, if I was working in a place where there's no smoke allowed, Moxa would be completely out of the question. And so even if people want to use it, in many ways, the current landscape of practice for many, many people precludes that. It seems like it's a real challenge to being able to use this particular method.
I think that would be very disappointing. If I wasn't allowed to use Moxa in my practice, I don't know what I would do. I'd be limited, so limited in the kind of effects I could get. I mean, it's interesting because I've lived 15 years in Malaysia and 4 years in Taiwan, where I am now. And I haven't found an acupuncturist that uses Moxa yet in this city. I've been to see 6, and they all use electroacupuncture and heat lamps. And none of them had used Moxa. And I was quite shocked by that because, if you don't smell Moxa smoke in a clinic, you should run a mile. There was a colleague of mine in the Toihari Association once said, I think it's so integral. And within the canon of acupuncture and moxibustion in Japan, then they say that acupuncture you should use for things that are acute and are at the level of qi. But once things sink down to the blood level, in other words, when things become chronic, you have to use Moxa. And by that, they mean rice grain Moxa, because it has an effect on moving the blood. So when things are stuck at that level, when they're chronic, when there's pain, when there's stiffness, there's tightness, then you have to use Moxa. It is required. So if people are not using Moxa, then they're not getting down to that deep level as perceived in Japanese acupuncture. And even within Chinese acupuncture, then Moxa is considered to be very important for chronic conditions and for longevity. I think Merlin would have more to say about that than me because he's the...
There's three aspects, I think, as far as my research tells us. There's 3 aspects where Moxa exceeds acupuncture and where the acupuncturist would I think would defer to Moxa. One of which is longevity, as you mentioned. Another is intractable disease, intractable, I think, disease. And the third is emergency medicine. So in the past, somebody's on death's door, you literally immolate them. I don't know what that's the right word, but you'd burn the hell out of them, in the hope of recovering them from death's door. Obviously, we don't need that. We don't need that aspect of Moxa anymore because we've got antibiotics. So emergency medicine is very much the home of biomedicine for sure. But intractable disease, rename that chronic disease, and that's the complaint of our age, isn't it? Various types of chronic disease, which biomedicine really isn't very good at because you attend to it and then you create another chronic condition as a side product of treating it. So it has a real part to play. And then also this aspect of longevity is very interesting as well, because what we're finding out more and more is what we've been finding out very recently really is these receptor proteins that become dysfunctional as we age, and which Moxa appears to be able to actually activate or trigger or downregulate, modulate in ways which we are only beginning to understand. So this aspect of Moxa being better than acupuncture it is explicit in the history of Chinese medicine, I'd say, but it's not actually always been that welcome. Nevertheless, I would add one thing is that actually probably the safety aspect of Moxa, because that's what we get quite neurotic about here in the UK is, oh my God, practitioners got to be so careful. They're going to burn practitioners. They're going to burn their patients.
Same here in the US.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you look at some of the Chinese literature, that obviously acupuncture over the ages has had a pretty shaky history, because the aspect of infection or cross infection was never understood. And I know there's I can't remember the name of the text, but there's a wonderful text, I think from about the 10th or 9th centuries, which basically says you must never insert a cold needle into a patient. It insults their qi, which is great. So today you would be able to wrap your needle up. It's still encased in its sterile container, and put it on a radiator. But what did they do? They put it in their mouth and then inserted it in their patient. So, it's not difficult to imagine that there was quite a lot of collateral casualties as a result of what was standard good practice in those days. With Moxa, the safety profile, I think, was probably better. There's a text from the 8th century which said, basically, I don't use acupuncture, it's too dangerous. I use Moxa. He's a herbalist. Admittedly, he may have had an axe to grind against acupuncture anyway. But basically, as far as he was concerned, you could kill people with acupuncture, but you didn't do that with Moxa. So it is interesting how these perspectives can change.
I was quite interested when I read your book in 2012, Moon Over Matsushima, that you talked about a kind of class thing, that you imagined that, or you hypothesized that Moxa was like a kind of folk medicine which came first. And then as there were changes in metallurgy and needle skills, then acupuncture got kind of more popular. And then there was one passage where you wrote about these two women at a spa, and you kind of imagine this conversation again. Oh, look at those burns on your skin. They're really awful, aren't they? You should see my guy. He doesn't eat those. It's so kind of trendy. And you kind of talked about how acupuncture became like this trendy aristocratic medicine, whereas Moxa belonged to the masses as a people's medicine. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I think that,
I sent you an email saying, don't give up your day job.
I genuinely believe that conversation was quite possible, because I think there is good evidence. First of all, there's no doubt about it. Moxa came first, and Moxa laid the ground rules for qi-based, the regulation of qi through acupuncture through the meridians or the channels. And there's no doubt about this, because of archaeology evidence tells us that. So it came first. It was a people's medicine in those days, I believe, but I can't prove that, obviously. And then along comes the acupuncturist, and the acupuncturist is I think the phrase that's used in the academic literature is the scholar physician arrives. And the scholar physician had an axe to grind of his own, which is, I've got to make a living out of this. And also, I'm pretty sure that the earliest needles would have been phenomenally expensive, because they would have been so difficult to make. Fine needles would be incredibly difficult to make. That had to be handmade and would take an awful lot of skill. So, whereas Moxa, literally, it doesn't grow on trees, it grows on bushes. But it's the same thing, adds up to the same thing, And it's interesting, one of our key inspirations with Mox Africa is this amazing doctor, Japanese doctor from the 20th century, early 20th century, Dr. Shimetara Hara, who lived to the grand old age of 108 and was a massive proponent of Moxa, who wrote a very famous book that's, I think it might still be in print in Japan, from 1933. And he said the quote unquote is that he said that Moxa was a proletarian medicine. Now, he's writing this in 1933 when the word proletarian had a very different connotations. It's quite a sort of pejorative, old-fashioned term now. But what he meant was, it's a people's medicine. It's a people's medicine, and that situation, I think, still exists to this day. And it was a people's medicine 2,000 years ago, and it's a people's medicine today, has a potential to be, particularly in this particular sort of slightly dystopian day and age that we seem to be living in today.
This is really interesting, thinking about the early acupuncture needles. Look, even well-made needles way back then were pretty crude devices. They weren't like, the cat whisker thin things that we have today. And I can just imagine, this is a fun conversation. I can just imagine, yes, the women at the spa, and it's like, yeah, you should see my acupuncturist. Well, just, the idea of an acupuncturist with a needle, I mean, that's high tech in those days. That's like the laparoscopic surgery of that moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So for sure you'd have these people and they would be elevated because, well, we use needles.
Yeah. It's for the elite. It was a elite medicine. I'm quite sure of it to start with.
I think you're right. I could easily see that. So that's really interesting.
And also
the people's medicine.
Yeah, I'll just say one, because you've got these 9 needles in the Ling Shu and the Suen. They talk about the 9 needles, and one of them is, they call it the Haozhen. Excuse my Chinese pronunciation, but the Haozhen. And Hao is a hare. It's the character for a hare. So they were using fine needles, but you can bet your life that most of them weren't using very fine needles, not like we're used to today.
Well, I think that was the implication of the guide tube, the Shinkan, that was invented in Japan, is because it holds the needle in place as you insert it, it enabled the use of much finer needles than were being used today, and also the use of silver needles and gold needles made of soft metals. So that was one of the implications of, the incredible value of the guide tube is not only could you insert needles more painlessly, but also you could use more painless needles by design, because you can't insert a sarin needle on its own. You can't just stick it in. You have to support it in some way. So, those very fine hair-like sarin needles have to be used with a guide tube.
For sure, I have found that if I want a free-handed needle, I grab one of my larger, thicker gauges. It's faster, easier. They don't bend. When they bend is when it becomes painful. But if you can insert it just with your hands directly and the needle doesn't bend, it's not that bad. But you need a thicker needle for that. You need a little bit higher caliber, so to speak. Now, Merlin, you were mentioning this research a moment ago related to longevity and something about some receptors. I'm wondering, where did that come from?
Well, it came from, originally, the first person that I know who stumbled upon it with regards to Moxa was actually Jenny Craig, who's a co-founder of Mox Africa Charity. She's got a PhD in a science background. So, and she came across these, they call them TRPs, this is back in 2010, probably, we first came across them. And the difference in terms of what is out there now in the scientific literature compared to what was out there then is extensive. There's much more on them now. The first of these, they call them transient receptor potential ion channels, ion, I-O-N. And what they are is they are tiny little proteins that are expressed, in other words, they exist on the surface of cells. And they moderate, they control what goes in and out of those cells in respect of particular chemical ions. So they're electrically charged chemical particles, and they operate that. And there are now known to be 28 of them expressed and potentially expressed on the surface cells of mammals. But of these, there are 3 specific ones which are often co-expressed on the same cells and often are associated with the experience, the perception of pain. What we didn't fully understand it, but we knew enough to know that there could be something in it regarding Moxa back in 2010, because we knew that some of them triggered with particular heat thresholds. So one of them triggers at 43 degrees centigrade. It triggers, and so that lets something into the cell which tells the brain, wow, this is hot. But there's another one that triggers at 52 degrees centigrade, which would tell the brain, that's really hot. Move fast because you're going to get a first-degree burn. So these are receptors which explain a lot about how we react to the world that we live in, to try and avoid toxicity, to try and avoid noxious substances. And as I say, there's 28 of them. So it's a complicated field. But what's happened in the last 15 years, I'd say, is that Big Pharma has realized that these things are also expressed in the brain and that they are involved, their functionality or dysfunctionality is involved in a clutch of conditions, which are some of the nastiest of our age, but also in aging, natural aging. So chronic conditions which would include things, I mean, these are the horror stories, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, in fact, dementias, full stop. These are the real things that medicine is desperately, and in the perception of pain. So the drug companies go looking for how can we modulate these receptors in the brain itself, because if we can figure that one out, then we can dump all the opioid drugs, which have got us into so much trouble. We're in a whole new chapter and we'd be able to patent them and we'd be able to make an absolute fortune. So they've been investing a lot of money in research in this field. And the question the natural question that arises for us as acupuncture practitioners are, do these receptors really trigger on and off, or improve in functionality with some provocation from the heat from Moxa? That was our first question, and it seemed a reasonable one to make. But what we've realized since is that it's not just the heat from Moxa which can modulate these receptors and how they function, that also it's some of the chemicals in the mugwort leaf itself. And this is where it gets almost like uncannily spooky, because there is, I'll just quote them very briefly, there's TRPV1, which triggers to temperature and seems to be able to desensitize pain receptors, which is how we think it works with Moxa. Why when you're using Moxa in an area, it tends to basically reduce the perception of pain. But also there's two other ones, TRPA1 and TRPA1 and TRPM8. And one of them is actually, they call it antagonized with two of the chemicals of Moxa, and which means that it actually reduces the triggering sensation of pain. And the other one is actually triggered by one of the dominant chemicals in Moxa, and that actually produces a sensation of cooling, the perception of cooling in the brain. So at the same time as the heat from Moxa, it's mind-blowing, this, to be honest. At the same time, and I've got to qualify it by saying it may, we don't know for sure that it does do, but at the same time as the heat from Moxa appears to desensitize the perception of pain, the absorption of the chemical from the mugwort leaf, from the Moxa in other words, through the skin, at the same time can then modulate the perception of pain from another of these receptors, and also produce a feeling of cooling, which will counteract the perception of pain with another of the receptors. So it's a three-pronged approach, and obviously also would be timed slightly differently. So the initial hit would be from the Moxa heat. The secondary hits would be from the chemical absorption. But in order to do this, you have to allow the Moxa to burn down close enough to the skin for some of these chemicals to actually absorb. And just adding one more thing is that the one of these receptors, the TRPA1, it only has two natural antagonists, that damp it down in the whole of the natural world. And one is called borneol, which is a dominant chemical in mugwort leaf, and the other is called 1,8-cineol, which is also a dominant chemical in mugwort leaf. There are 192 chemicals being identified in mugwort leaf naturally. These are the dominant chemicals in mugwort. It's almost as if somebody's designed this for us. So if we ignore these possibilities, we are really doing ourselves a disfavor. There's a massive amount of work to do here, which is beyond us to be honest. I'm talking about me and Jenny in Mox Africa, but it's something that really deserves our exploration, because we may have something to explain some of these mysterious mechanisms of Moxa that is very, very scientifically based, and which, as I say, the drug companies are super, super interested in for commercial reasons. And so they're going to keep funding this research. And so more and more information is going to become available, which we can just look at and learn from. It's a very exciting time to be a moxibustionist.
Now, is this research that we would have access to? I mean, sometimes drug companies do research and it's like their own private business. They're not going to share it.
Yeah. No, this is getting shared. They're funding research which is getting shared. That's the case. Now, some of it you might have to pay for, in that it's behind it's published in journals which you've got to pay. But if you've got academic access to these sorts of journals, then you wouldn't have to pay for it, obviously, if you've got that. But most of the work we've done, we haven't paid a single penny for access to this literature. And there's a lot out there, believe me. We've tried to distill it recently with this reissue, second edition of the Moon over Matsushima. And there's 50 odd pages. Oran, I think it's about 50 odd pages, isn't it? Mm. And I can testify to the fact that it's a trying read. It's a testing read, because it's technical, but we've done our absolute best. I did my best to put it into shape, and then Oran has polished it in a way that makes it considerably easier to read. And if you're interested in Moxa, I think it's an absolute must read now to try and understand this.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection. Understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. Well, I wanted to ask you about this, because I know you've got this book and that you've recently come out with a second edition. Merlin, I just have to say, I'm so impressed with your bandwidth here. On one hand, you're like the Shen Nong, the Johnny Appleseed of Moxa, like Moxa to the masses, and here's a very simple and effective way of treating people. And on the other hand, you start going off on research and receptors and chemicals, and you sound like, a Nobel-level biochemist.
No, you're getting ahead of it here. But I mean, the reality is, to contextualize this, basically, the original idea emerged: could Moxa do something for drug-resistant TB if it was really, because there's plenty of documentation that it was used for treating TB in Japan in the 1930s when they had a lot of tuberculosis. So the logical question was, well, if it worked then, why wouldn't it work now when the drugs aren't working? So that was where we started. And the reason why I went deeper and deeper down into the Moxa rabbit hole was because I realized that if we were going to do any work on this, we had to know what we were talking about. So that's why and just on two fronts. One was we had to know more about Moxa. And then I started to realize how little we actually did know. And secondly, we had to know a little bit about the disease we're talking about as well, which is a whole minefield of itself. But so that's really why this I love it. Word bandwidth. I'm gonna be using that a lot. Believe me, I've got this massive bandwidth.
You do.
But it's actually
You're the Bob Geldof of the Moxa. Bringing
But I mean, look,
bandwidth to the world.
that's why the bandwidth had to be broadened, because if we're going to talk to medical people, we had to basically convince them that we've got something worth talking about. Something that's biomedically convincing or has biomedical potential. So, yeah, which has taken us well away from, my day-to-day work as an acupuncturist, we're working with qi, we're regulating qi, this is what it's all about. Well, with Moxa, it takes us in a very, very different direction, but it's a very relevant direction, I think. And we haven't even begun to expose all of it, I don't think,
And I think it speaks a bit to sort of the zeitgeist of our time. Those of us who have practiced this weird East Asian medicine, I'm actually quite comfortable calling it weird these days. It's taken me a long time to come to a sense of comfort with saying acupuncture is weird and not apologizing for it.
Yeah.
And I'm not turning a blind eye to all the scientific and all the Western medicine ways of looking at it. I'm not turning a blind eye to it. I'm just no longer turning a blind eye to, in some ways, it's extremely, extremely strange stuff, and leaving some room for that as well. I think there's room for both of it. That's just a little editorial. The zeitgeist of our time says integration. The zeitgeist of our time says for us to be relevant with our medicine in this moment, we have to show up in a way that meets the moment. Part of that is research. Part of that is being able to talk to conventional medicine practitioners in a way that they can say, oh yeah, I get what you're talking about. That makes sense. Let's continue the conversation. There's room for it. There's room for a new kind of scholar, not just in going into the classics, but also how do we go into the present moment with what we have? And it sounds like with this republishing, it's a second edition, right, of your book, you're doing some of this. Oran, can you tell us a little more about what people will find with this?
Well, I should say that Merlin wrote Moon over Matsushima in 2012, and there was a short section on Mox Africa and what Mox Africa was beginning or aiming to do. And there was some other stuff. It was an amazing book because it's a history of moxibustion through the ages, and it's talks about the relationship between acupuncture and Moxa, as we've discussed. And then it talked about the potential of Moxa. But what Merlin's done in the second edition, my involvement as I'm the publisher and the editor, is that he's stuck in these, he's kind of finished the book. The untold story of Mox Africa, which was just a couple of pages in those days, is now a full chapter on the research that Mox Africa has achieved. And, the results that they got by treating drug-resistant TB and drug-resistant TB cross-infection with HIV. So what results did they get, and where was this research done? So it was done in Africa, it was done in North Korea. And it's an amazing read. It's an incredible story, just the Mox Africa story. What he's also done is he has condensed this very difficult stuff about TRPs into one chapter on the new research, and not just talking about the research that he's kind of deciphered for us, but also about the implications of it. So if burning Moxa on the skin has this effect on down-regulating these overactive TRPs, you can imagine them like a light switch that's jammed in the on position. So if someone's in chronic pain, it's because their TRPs are constantly in the on position, constantly signaling that there's something going on to the nervous system. And those signals are going to the brain. So how can we down-regulate them? How does the heat down-regulate them? And if that's what it's doing, what point should we use? How should we apply our Moxa in a way that could affect these very serious diseases? So Merlin's got a whole new theory, a whole new model of moxibustion. It's like, how does it work? Could it be through this mechanism? And then also, what do we do with it? What are the implications for our practice? How can we go to, do we use points on the spine at the nerve roots? Do we use local points? Do we use distal points? And if so, which distal points do we use? So it's a whole kind of new package that is out there for us to take away and run with. And what I love about books is, you're planting seeds, and you publish a book, and then people go out there, and then people come back to you and they say, those ideas you had in your book, I've tried them and I've changed them and I've done this, this and this. And it's kind of like, then the whole thing grows and it takes on a life of its own. So I think that if you want to understand moxibustion, then the 2012 book was the defining text on moxibustion. There's never been a book like it. It does for Moxa what Understanding Acupuncture by Stephen Birch and Felt. I can't remember. Robert Felt, I think his name was. Bob Felt, yeah. So it does for moxibustion what Understanding Acupuncture did for acupuncture. But now it's got all this new stuff in it, which is really exciting. I have to say, health warning, that there are some people who bought Munova Matsushima for the compendium of Moxa treatments at the end, which was like a really lovely, slick 20, 30 pages of, for this disease, do this, for this disease, do these points, this. And it was really like a garden of delights for me. But that section is out because it made the book too long. It's already 450 pages now. And that's going to be in a book 2, which is going to be called The Moon at the Window. And yeah, there you go. So there'll be a short clinical guide to points. So if you're buying Munova Matsushima for the revised point compendium, you'll have to wait till The Moon at the Window next year. So don't be disappointed. Don't come back to us. But if you want to understand Moxa, go for this second edition. I think it's just a defining classic, and it just pushes our understanding of the mechanism of Moxa in ways that I hadn't imagined. So fair play to Merlin for that.
And I don't think it is for a second the final story. And also, I doubt very much if my personal conviction is that acupuncture is not a single, doesn't have its effects through a single mechanism. It probably has it through 5 or 6 different mechanisms. And I suspect the Moxa is something similar. It's going to be working not just through these TRPs. So it doesn't tell us the whole story, but it does open up a massive, massive new zone of possibilities that really do need to be explored. I'll just explain one aspect, which isn't really described in the book. So we're not trying to get you to buy the book for this, but it's some acupuncture or some Moxa points appear to be insensitive to heat. So say, for instance, you have appendicitis.
Insensitive to heat.
Insensitive to heat, yeah. So say, for instance, acute appendicitis in the Japanese literature, you use REN6, CV6, and you batter it with Moxa, so you might do 30 or 40 points. Why? Because the point's insensitive. So
cones.
So we've got the person with acute appendicitis. The specific points are insensitive. So you just blast the Moxa. Okay, that's a basic principle. Recently, we work with some fibromyalgia patients. I'll cut to the quick. Basically, what I find is that in the intrascapular area of the upper back, so between the shoulder blades, there are points which are very tight to palpatory pressure. And then when you burn Moxa on them, they don't feel a thing. And there are other points which are they're hypersensitive to heat. So it's like, wow, that one I heard. And another one, did you feel that? No, I didn't feel a thing. And what I've found is, and this is early days, so don't take any of this as the final gospel by any manner of means, but what I've found is that if you then use multiple cones of Moxa on the insensitive points, it wakes the points up, and oh my God, the condition seems to respond at quite a profound level. So over 2 or 3 treatments, you get a complete change in the patient's perception of their discomfort, their pain, their energy levels, just from Moxa. So the body is telling us which points need more Moxa, just from their thermosensitivity. And I'm pretty sure that at the back of that is these receptors. These receptors are basically not functioning well. They're saying, give us heat, give us heat, give us heat, so we can function better. And then the central nervous system begins to respond better as well. So it's it opens up so many possibilities, and sharing them, being able to share them with our community, offers the opportunity for, particularly for younger practitioners, to really have a look at this, and it could make a huge difference to their overall career. I think it's fair to say that all three of us are kind of like we're at the second half of our careers, not the first half. Oh, Oran, well, so impressed made you with that one. But I do intend to live for a long time, so and Moxie's going to help me do it. Nothing else does. But honestly, we need to excite young people with this idea so that they can adopt it, take it on board, and carry the flame forward. Really, the Moxa flame forwards.
Just having this conversation with you guys, it makes me realize how I have overlooked and not used this particular tool that's mine to use. All of ours to use, really. And in particular, because I like putting my hands on people. I really do. Merlin, what you're just talking about, you feel some points on the scapula and they're insensitive. Those are not hard to find, right? We touch people all the time and recognize, oh yeah, this part of the body, it's like fuzzy dead wood. It's just not enlivened. You can bring a needle to it. You can bring Moxa to it. Look, you put your hands on it and probably change it too, if you pay attention. But I'm kind of lazy. So if I can put a needle in it, or if I could use some Moxa and then have the body do the work itself.
And I think this is what Oran's...
to me, that's wonderful medicine.
Yeah. And I think it's... Sorry.
Because I was just let me finish it. Because then it's not me doing something to heal the patient. It's me kicking off something inside, and the person can heal themselves. And I think that's a very, very big distinction, and a very important one, that when we can engage the body's natural capacity to be in balance, to take care of troubles, then our work is best done. Our work is best done.
And I think this is, with Oran's Ontake, I think it's inducing similar effect in the central nervous system. I don't know what you'd say, Oran, it's inducing change, profound change in the body, isn't it?
I think so. There's whenever I teach Ontake, I see that every student in the class has what I call the Ontake moment. But actually, I could equally well be calling it the TRP moment, because it's something about the warmth of the Ontake. Then people just go, oh, that feels nice. And that's what's so profound about the therapy. But I explain this to students, and I'd like to explain it to your listeners as well, is when you go around to visit your best friend and you ring on the doorbell, you're on the outside of the house and you ring the doorbell, that sends a signal to the inside of the house. And then whoever's inside the house will come and open the door. So if it's a grandmum, she'll hobble slowly to the door and slowly open it. Or if it's a teenager, she might bound down the stairs and pull open the door and say, hi, But either way, you can't say that the doorbell opened the door. What you did is you sent information from the outside of the house to the inside of the house. You sent a signal. And that's what we're doing with acupuncture. And now we can see how we're literally doing that with Moxa. We're sending a signal from the outside, the skin, the yang surface, to the inside, to the internal connections and to the organs. And that is triggering movement, just like a doorbell triggers movement. But we're not doing it. We're asking the body to do it. We're giving them the message. So I think that fits in with what I was talking about with Hirata earlier, where he was trying to devise a system that, first of all, triggered the body's healing response, and secondly, people could do on their own. So that family medicine, that whole Moxa being the people's medicine thing. So it really ties nicely with the kind of historical precedents that we have about Moxa.
And there's something else with the Ontake that I've found to be really profound for the people that I use it with. The heat is one thing, and it's wonderful. The lack of a lot of smoke, for me as a practitioner, is terrific. The thing that's really amazing is there's something about the rhythmic percussing of the bamboo onto the body and the way that goes through the tissues and what it does to the nervous system. There's probably all kinds of ways to talk about it. But what I notice most is people get off the table and they just feel great. They're just happy and quiet and content and appreciative. It's really lovely. There's something about that percussive experience that does something. I don't know what it does. You guys might have some ideas because you're thinking about this more. I just noticed that it really does something to the patient. Yeah, so Oran, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I think Ontake works on a number of levels. And I think the level that is most profound is when the bamboo tube is facing downwards and the radiated heat from the moxa is touching the skin or affecting the skin. So if I had to draw a pie chart, then I'd say the heat is the big thing about Ontake. Then the second, when you turn it over, it's a warm pressing tool and that feels nice. And when applied rhythmically, that's really very comforting. And I do a lot of rocking of the body, pressing with the Ontake in one hand and rocking the body with the other hand. So it becomes like a very rhythmic therapy, or I'm doing a lot of kind of percussive strokes, like a kind of tapotement with the warm Ontake in. I'm going up and down the legs. And that is sending this kind of little mini shockwave through the muscles. And that's also very relaxing because it's not just percussive, but it's warm. So I think it's the mechanical strokes have big effect. And as you know, I apply it with Dr. Manika's meridian frequencies. I use the metronome. And the sound of the metronome itself is slightly hypnotic, particularly if you have it at a low volume. So I think that the Ontake has a very profound effect on a number of levels. And then there are these other levels that it's maybe affecting. So the sound is an anchor. So when someone's had Ontake once and they hear that sound and they smell that smell, then they get triggered back into that relaxed state right away. So it doesn't take so long.
Little Pavlovian classical conditioning there.
Yeah, I had a patient, I often tell this story when I teach. She came with mastitis. She'd had a newly born and he was a week old and she had breast sores. So I gave her an Ontake to take home with her. And I said, just tap around the breast sore, tap around it and just not on it, but around it. And so she did that. She came back the next week and it had gone away. And she says, listen, my little boy's getting colic. Can I do the bamboo on him? I said, well, he's only like 2 weeks old. So yes, you can, but you're going to have to promise me that you only do it for 20 seconds at a time. I just want you to just go over his belly like this. And I showed her for no more than 20 seconds. So we set a stopwatch and she timed it. So she got the sense of what 20 seconds are like. She came back the next week and I said, well, how did it go with the boy? And she said, well, it's very interesting. Every time, let me grab a lighter so that your readers, your listeners can hear it. So every time he would start crying with the colic and I would click the lighter and I would light the Ontake. So for the first 3 days, I applied Ontake and he'd stop crying. Well, on the fourth day, as soon as he heard the lighter, he stopped crying. And from then on, it was just the sound of the lighter that cured him. It wasn't the Ontake. So that taught me that what an anchor the sound is. So when you're using a metronome, then that's also an anchor. And when you smell the moxa, that's also an anchor. And for a baby, it was enough to stop him crying. Oh yeah, the heat's coming. I know what's coming next. I can relax. I feel better already. So I think all of those things work with Ontake, but with Merlin's theory of TRPs, I think that when you apply the heat with a lighted end of the Ontake facing the skin, you are down regulating the on switch that's jammed, the switch that's jammed in the on position. And I think that's for me now. I think I understand what's going on with Ontake. So yeah, it's TRP stuff.
I love it that you guys can talk about this at a very biochemical level. At the same time, I just heard you use the word comforting to describe Ontake. And I would say that's the word that I wanted to say, but I was missing when I was describing what my patients experience. There's a deep and a profound sense of comfort. Now, where that comes from, I'm glad we got guys like you that are looking, way inside at stuff. I'm just happy enough as a practitioner to know this can do that.
There's it's interesting what you were saying, or this story is very interesting because I don't know, have you ever talked with Jeffrey Dan, Michael?
Yes, a bit. Yes,
Well, Michael, I think Jeffrey Dan talks about kind of mother's touch.
Yes, he does. Oh my God. And when he does,
Yeah.
the sound of his voice, the way it drops, the way his eyes, he's already got these lovely soft eyes and they soften a little more. When he says that word, mother's touch, the whole room shifts.
Yeah. And interestingly, if you see a mother, often instinctively, a distressed baby, they stand up and then what do? They bounce. They bounce and it's a rhythmic bounce. So that comforting is, it's probably hardwired into us from, and it's throwing us back to everything's going to be okay now times, So that comforting thing.
I have the image of a gently rocking boat. That's cool. I can bring that into my clinical work. I can give people a gently rocking boat experience.
And going, yes, and adding to the Moxa's sort of aspect of it. If anybody has seen Junji Mizutani working with Moxa, his approach is rhythmical. There's absolutely no debate about it. My approach is not rhythmical because I don't have his skills. I don't have his dexterity. But his approach is rhythmical, and I'm certain it adds to the effect of the Moxa. So there's a rhythmical aspect to this, which I'm no expert in, but it's there.
That was what led me to Ontake. I was a model for Junko Ida, Stephen's wife, when she was, this is back in 97, when she was teaching Manica the second weekend, level 2. And I was the model when she was doing Oku. So she was doing Oku on stomach 36. And up until that time, I'd always understood that the effect of Moxa was the heat. So, you apply heat to a point, it stimulates the point, and these things happen, and then, it does its stuff. But when you're doing Oku, small cone moxibustion, you have a little bunch of Moxa in your fingers, and you constantly extrude this little thread of Moxa, and you break pieces off, you light them, you put them on the skin, you light them, they burn down, you extinguish, and at the same time, you're extruding a little bit more, you break it up, you put it down. So it's a very quick, rhythmic thing if you're good at it. We've all confessed we're not very good at it. But Junko was excellent at it.
Yeah.
And so what I was feeling was heat, coolness, heat, coolness, heat, coolness. So, and I realized it was the rhythm of her application. She was so good at it. She was so swift at it that it wasn't just the heat. It was the rhythm of the heat. It's like a cycle. And I thought, wow, this would be really good if I could only find a device that would allow me to apply these things at a frequency like Dr. Manica's frequencies. Wouldn't that be cool? And so that's what set me off on my quest. And that's how I ended up kind of integrating Ontake with Dr. Manica's frequencies, because I thought, well, Moxa is inherently rhythmic, so we can apply it at different frequencies of rhythm. And that's where I got it from. So that was a kinesthetic lesson in 1997 that led to me kind of discovering Ontake in 2009. So it's stuck with me for all those years.
And Dr. Manica was a big fan of Moxa, wasn't he? I mean, I think one of his prescriptions is when to use Moxa. If you can't find anything else that works, throw Moxa at it. Really, complex conditions that you just can't figure out. And he had basic protocols, didn't he? So he wouldn't be upset at all with what you're doing, would he? He'd be delighted.
I think so.
It really makes me wonder about the role of rhythm in our work. Oran, as you were just describing receiving the Moxa treatment, I'm thinking back to my first Japanese acupuncture teacher in my first year of acupuncture school, and he was amazing with the Moxa. I mean, it just was this constant motion of rolling and breaking and lighting and dousing and rolling, and it was incredibly rhythmic. Again, I'm I think partly in some ways because I haven't been able to come anywhere close to that rhythm. It's like, oh, I can't do this because I can't do that. It's really helpful to listen to you guys like, yeah, I'm a little bit clumsy, but I do it anyway. And, I make it work. It's helpful. And then, of course, with the Antake, much easier to manage that rhythmic experience. I'm thinking about when I put needles in, I don't just be like, oh, there's the point, needle, dink. It's like, oh, there's the point. It's here. What's it feel like? What's the tissue like here? I'm touching it. I want to, like, where exactly is that point? And what direction does the needle need to go? There's a whole rhythmic sense that I use in getting myself ready to insert a needle, which is part of a whole set of motions. It's not just insert a needle. There's an entire set of motion that goes into a needle being inserted and then touched and then inviting dochi. Rhythm is in that too. And I didn't realize that I did that until we're having this conversation. There's something about rhythm that I hadn't thought about before, but I think it's integral. So thank you.
Yeah, I think there are rhythms in needling, aren't there? I mean, with some of the, there's numerology in needling, using 3/12s or 7/12s or 9/12s. If you're doing kind of lifting and thrusting, and you're lifting and thrusting at different levels with some. There's fire from heaven, where you start off superficially and then you go a little bit deeper to the earth level, and then you go down to the water level. So the earth level. Am I getting it right? 3 levels anyway. And you're twirling at different levels rhythmically. So yeah, I think rhythm is an integral part. I think I'd like you to delete that comment, given that I got it. I can try and say it again.
We do a lot of stumbling in the work that we do, and that's not wrong.
Yeah, but not on a podcast.
There's a lot of getting it right on the way, getting it wrong on the way to getting it right. And, the important thing, and this is why I love this podcast, it's about communication. Here's the other thing I love about the podcast. Sometimes we step all over our words, or we have a thought and it kind of goes somewhere but nowhere, and we come back around. This is how we are as human beings. The thing I love about doing this podcast, having a conversation like the one that we're having right now, we get to be the people that we are. We're not perfect. We're noodling this stuff out in real time. So often, and especially in this internet world of, look, I'm perfect and everything around me is perfect. It's really nice to be able to see people just being people and to hear people just being people. I don't consider it stumbling. I consider it a generous kind of communication with our colleagues. That's just me. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, well, I'm nothing if not authentic.
It takes a long time to be comfortable with who we are. So there's that.
Yeah. Also, being able to admit what we don't know. They say the more you know, the more you don't know, sort of thing. I think we come face to face with it all the time.
It's a damn deep ocean. And thank goodness, because if you had it all completely worked out, wouldn't that get boring after a couple of weeks?
For sure.
I'm laughing, just remembering something from my early college days, because I studied with Dr. Van Buren at ICON back in the 80s. And someone said to me once, you know what? Dr. Van Buren's forgotten more about acupuncture than we know, or something, or he's forgotten more about acupuncture than we'll ever know. Which you kind of, now I'm at this kind of age, I think, yeah, I've probably forgotten quite a lot. I didn't know that much to start with, so I don't know where that leaves me.
Well, hopefully you've forgotten the wrong bits, if you see what I mean, the right bits to be.
Right. Yeah, I think I've kept the functional parts.
I had an experience some years ago. I was leaving Seattle and actually moving back to Beijing. And I was going through my stuff because I wasn't sure if I was coming back or not. And I remember I had this file cabinet full of notes from acupuncture school. And I thought, well, I don't want to store these notes. I'm going to scan all this stuff. And then I'll just have it in digital form. And as I started going through it, I realized, oh, some of this stuff, I don't need to scan it because I know it. It's who I am. It's how I work. I don't need to save it. It's in me. there was another pile that also didn't get scanned because I read through it and I went, yeah, these are class notes. I thought maybe it would be useful or someday I would learn it. But actually, this isn't me. It's not how I work. If I decide I'm interested later, I can go buy a book, but these notes, I don't need them because I can just let it go. It's just, there's no place for it. And then there was a small pile of things I was interested in, didn't have it down yet. That's what got scanned. And I think this is what happens to us as practitioners over the years.
And it should do, shouldn't it? It should do.
I would hope so. Otherwise, you got a lot of stagnation going. And you haven't changed your mind either. And that's a problem. So anyway, we should probably bring this boat into the dock. I'd like to wind it up here with, how do I want to wind it up? I want to, look, you guys are, Moxa mavens. Beyond Moxa, just like at this moment, in general, when it comes to medicine, I'm just curious to know, like, what's got your attention? Like, what are the questions that are like really juicy for you at this moment? Maybe it has to do with Moxa, maybe it's something else. And I'm just curious to know what your cutting edge is, and then we'll wind it down.
It's such a big question, Oran. I want you to go first, so I can open it.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm experimenting with how little I dare to do and still hope to get results. So I remember reading a book by Mark Seam on American acupuncture where he talked about 4-channel sets and he needed to needle 3 of those sets. And it was kind of like a very strong kind of treatment with lots of needles. And that really excited me at that time. And, that whole theoretical model. But, I do Toyohari, and Toyohari uses touch needling, and now I don't even use a needle, I use a Taishin. And I've started to use a kind of needle-free version of Manica system acupuncture. And I'm wondering how little I can do, so with each patient, I think, well, I've done these things. I've got the pulse I wanted. I've got the belly change I wanted, but I did much, much less than I did even a year ago, and certainly than I did 4 years ago. So how much lighter can I get and still get results with the patient and still call myself an acupuncturist? So that's my question.
I love that. Can I still call myself an acupuncturist? I didn't even put a needle in their body. Can I still call myself an acupuncturist? I put a needle or 2 in. Am I still an those are great questions.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to attempt to answer your question. Not very well, I don't think, because I think first thing I've got to say is that I think my answer is going to be slightly schizophrenic in that listening to Oran talking about exploring the way he's working in a clinical setting, and I think my journey is somewhat similar. My own sort of current exploration as well is incorporating Sotai, which is like a structural balancing, gentle structural balancing, again endorsed by Dr. Manica. That's how I first came across it, and how well or not well it combines with my acupuncture and Moxa. And I'm intrigued. And it's, as I say, it's an ongoing story. But my other schizophrenic part of me is how the hell are we going to get more data, more convincing information on the capacity for Moxa to support what is actually probably the most shameful story in medicine, which is neglected, that tuberculosis is awarded in the current era. And it continues. It's a shameful neglect. It's a persistent plague. It's a pandemic that's not called a pandemic. And I mean, the evidence that we have is convincing enough, I think, to say there's more work to be done investigating it. And currently the situation is we're in a sort of stalled position where the sort of research that's needed is beyond our resources and needs people who should and could get involved, but for different reasons don't seem to want to. So that's kind of like, it can keep you awake at night, and those sort of ideas. So Moxa's got it's still got to have its day in that respect. I'm quite convinced of it.
Well, we've got you guys leading the charge on that. And look, I think we all at times have things that wake us in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's ruminative thought that's worth not paying attention to, and sometimes it's something damn important that we should. So it's good to have something to go after, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, gentlemen, this has been delightful. Always fun to noodle on the really incredible tools that we have. They're so simple, and a lifetime of study and practice gives us, a glimpse if we're lucky. So thanks for your time today, and I look forward to the next time we have an opportunity to connect.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you very much indeed for having us.
I love talking to folks like Merlin and Oran who have a deep love for traditional methods, but don't simply copy what's gone before. They bring it into the modern moment in a creative and innovative way. There's a simplicity to Moxa that I forget about until I have this kind of conversation. And perhaps because I'm so fascinated with how effective needles can be, I forget that Moxa offers its own unique firepower. And beyond that, it is something that doesn't require training in acupuncture to use. I'm fond of the idea that Moxa is a people's medicine, an accessible and effective tool, not unlike gua sha or cupping, and how this can be taught to non-professionals and used in a safe and effective way. Their reflections on the science behind Moxa, including how it interacts with TRP receptors to modulate pain, it adds an aspect of modern biomedicine to this traditional practice that helps us to understand Moxa's impact on physiology and give us a vocabulary for talking with conventional biomedicine doctors. I'm reminded that there are places I've overlooked where I could be using Moxa in my practice, and that there are more than a few methods I could use to bring the healing heat of burning Moxa into my clinical work. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.